Museum, for those of you who don't know me. And we are very pleased to have you here for our monthly lecture series. And tonight I am very happy to introduce Dennis Loba. Dennis here has a Bachelor of Arts in History from VMI. He was 12 plus years as a captain in the Army and the National Guard. He's had a lifelong interest in history. He participated actually in America's bicentennial events. So he's kind of excited to see another big celebration come around. He said there's a little bit of deja vu going on as we get ready to celebrate yet another big birthday for America. He regularly volunteers with Germana, Historic Germana, which is just down the road. I actually met him at an event at Salubria, where he was playing the gentleman, well, pastor, I guess, of the house there. He also works at the Carlisle House in Alexandria. He's been at Historic Williamsburg and Historic Waynesboro in Pennsylvania. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. I appreciate you coming out. And I'll hopefully, even though it's April Fool's Day, I'll make this as interesting and as intellectually stimulating as possible. We've got about 3 or 4 more that are just right here, so I'll give it a sec. My talk tonight is going to be basically, if you came and thought it was been on the Culpeper Minutemen, it is not going to be, because there's a whole lot more people from this particular county, and I'm not from this county, that are a lot more smarter about that subject matter than I am. However, when it comes to the Colonial Militia themselves, that's one of my specialties, and I will gladly cover that as best I can. And then at the end, if you have any questions or whatever, please ask them, because if I can answer them, I will, and if I can't, I'll tell you I can't. So without further ado, the presentation is on the dress, arms, and equipment of the Colonial Militia. So let's start out with some of the costuming or the uniforms or lack thereof of uniforms that you might have seen of men going out of Culpeper County, Fauquier County, any county that had a militia at the time that got called into service or were just meeting for their annual muster day at their respective county courthouses. You're going to see a wide array, and I've brought these 2 sets and the one I'm wearing as a kind of to give you an idea of the color and the flair of things. You're going to see short jackets, workman jackets like this. You're going to see frock coats like I'm wearing. And an underestimated part of any colonial reenactment nowadays especially is this particular smock here called the farmer's smock. And what they did is almost all farmers exclusively wore those, and they wore them over their clothes to keep their clothes clean, etc. Usually they were either hemp or linen, and the main fibers of this clothing that you see at least here is going to be wool, hemp, linen, a little bit of cotton here and there, and that's going to be about it. Linen, contrary to popular belief, breathes very well like cotton. The reason you don't see a lot of cotton during the initial stages of the Revolutionary War with the militias is that Eli Whitney hasn't come forth yet, and it's a very laborious job to pick the seeds out of it. Therefore, it ends up being very expensive, and so only the very wealthy can really afford the expense of that particular clothing, where linen is made from flax, which is a crop grown out in the field, and it's much cheaper and much easier to deal with. Almost all broadcloth, wool broadcloth like I'm wearing, or this workman's jacket is usually imported. There's a few places in America that make good broadcloth, but for the most part, it's going to be imported from the mother country. This is a linen waistcoat. Underneath that one is a wool one. Handkerchiefs, especially with a little flair to them, is a big thing. It's kind of a way to show off. These were all, this one in particular, and all the originals were all hand blocked. In other words, they were stretched out and with different color molds and or stamps and different colors, they were made up like that. That one is an indigo one, which was also a very common color. Indigo plantations in the South, especially South Carolina. It was a very popular color, and so you see a lot of neckerchiefs, etc. in that. So clothing-wise, this is called a fantail hat. This is a very typical hat of the 18th century farming hat. You see a lot of paintings of soldiers wearing these. It's probably keeps the weather off your face, but it's light enough, etc., where it can be worn in the sun, and it's got a comfort level that's probably a lot better than that tricorn there. That one has a big silk cockade on it. You see all kinds of cockades. Black usually means that it's the House of Hanover. This one's a black one as well. This is a fur felt hat. In other words, it's made from beaver. And this is an upper echelon hat. I'm dressed like an officer tonight, and so this is what you see as far as the officer corps. Normally, they were the more wealthy men of the community, except for the lieutenants and the subalterns or the sergeants, and they were usually voted on by the militia itself to have those ranks. I had the lucky fortune of seeing a commission that was signed by Francis Fauquier for a guy who was an ensign in the Fauquier militia here a number of years ago. So the governor did sign those certificates and pretty much took great pride in doing that, okay? Of course, the normal pants are breeches. I'm wearing a pair of leather breeches. Leather breeches were a big, I'll step over here so some of the others can see. Leather breeches were a big hit, especially if you were a horseman. They wore real well. The deer tanning industry in America was huge. They were sending thousands of deer hides back to England to make these breeches. They wear well, and men actually wear these up until probably 1840s, 1850s in a form of either breeches or trousers. I'm wearing a embroidered waistcoat, silk embroidered waistcoat. It's an upper end waistcoat. It's a lot more, I want to say, upper end than that one there. This one, I don't know if I can, this one's a green wool one. If I can get it out of the way so you can see it. It's a very plain, just green. You're going to see all kinds of colors. You're going to see all kinds of combinations. I would be very reluctant to use the word ragtag looking, because these guys turned out in clothes that were going to possibly go the campaign. They weren't really ragtag. They had been foremen, at least in this county in Fauquier, since the French and Indian War. They knew what they were doing. For the most part, they were well drilled. And most of the time, the muster days were at the same as when the court met at the local county courthouse. Of course, here in Culpeper, the name of the town was either Fairfax or it was Culpeper Courthouse. The name of this town was not Culpeper until like 1871, after the Civil War. But they would meet, usually got a little bit rowdy. Of course, there was some drinking at the local ordinaries, and the court days and the militia muster was kind of a, what do I want to say, a combined exercise where people that hadn't seen each other in the county for a while, came to drill and hobnob, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass around this photograph, and this is of a muster at Colonial Williamsburg, and this picture was taken, I don't know, probably 50, 60 years ago, and I'm going to pass it around, and this is about as typical as a muster would be here at Culpeper or up my way in Fauquier or just about anywhere. So I apologize, I blew it up from a smaller photo, so it's a little grainy, but you'll get the idea. How about you start that, young man? Put your hands out so you can take it. There you go. Yeah, it does. It could be from the Patriot. I could be. But this is really typical, so take a close look at it. Okay, let's do this. Does anybody have any questions about clothing or dress? Yes, ma'am.
I'm not really about clothing, but a muster is a what? What is
A muster is when the militia gets together, all the officers, all the privates, all the lieutenants, the ensigns who carry the flag, everybody gets together and they do drill for either 1 or 2 days. And there were certain places here, I know they drilled at Catawba. I know they drilled there here in Culpeper County. Up in Fauquier, they drilled up at Marshall and some other places. Usually they pick places around the county that everybody didn't have to go such a long distance every time to the same place. Okay? Yes?
Were their uniforms the same all 4 seasons?
For the most part, yes. 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 What they went off to war until they got to, when the militias reported to Williamsburg to become regiments in the Virginia Continental Line, then they issued uniforms as they could, as the cloth was available. But for the most part, they went away from here in their civilian clothes, probably the best and most durable that they had, because most of the duty was for like 3 months initially. So your stuff had to last that long. Now, to just give you an idea, in England at this same time, for a young man, and the young men then were, well, I don't know if they're so much as young men now because it's very different, but they used to troll St. James Park and Vauxhall Park and all these places to attract the ladies, okay? A regular clerk during the 18th century, mid-18th century, for what they call a ditto suit, that's a matching coat, waistcoat, and breeches, would end up working about 6 months of the year to afford that coat. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? That's big money. Now, used clothing and all that was a huge business. And yeah, I've seen a couple of satirical prints where you go into these shops and you could buy overcoats, you could buy basically anything you see here as long as you had the money to afford it. Okay? Yes, sir.
You may have answered this, but I lost the thread. Did the individuals have to buy the uniforms, or were they provided by the county? Or
well, in militia times, they came in their clothes. So the answer to that question is they bought their own. Once they got to the public store in Williamsburg, the colony would furnish material. They had company or regimental tailors, and basically the only ones that weren't wearing uniforms or some kind of uniform was either they ran out of cloth or whatever, or the officers could basically pick whatever colors they wanted, and there was no standard as far as uniform that you see like Washington or Hugh Mercer or some of these other fellows several years later. Of course, they'd gone to those uniforms, but in the beginning from the public store in Williamsburg, which is where all the regiments rendezvoused, it was kind of, as far as the men, they offered, the 2nd Virginia came out of there with these plum-colored hunting frocks, which are very similar to that, and the officers were in civilian clothes. Yes, in the back.
Sir, no way. Did you speak to materials? And I understand there was a protocol to the number of curls. More curls are more important than the person thought they were.
Well, first of all, the man with the largest wig, he's the big wig. And that's where that term comes from. And some of these fops and stuff I'm sure you've seen some of these satirical prints, and for some reason during the 18th century, they just like to pick on the fops and guys with big wigs, and they really literally make art of it, okay? And it's very satirical, okay? To answer your question, there is a boatload of different styles. And wigs, especially with the militia, probably the only people that you would see wearing wigs would be the officers. It's a cumbersome thing. It's something you got to take care of. And for the most part, everybody wore their own hair. Now, as far as the number of buckles, these are called buckles, the curls are. This is I think there's 2 here, isn't there, or 3? 3, all right. This is a 3 buckle wig. And you'll see 5 buckles, and you'll see just a wide array of.
So why do they wear wigs?
It was brought over from France by Charles II because Louis XIV was going bald, and his vanity said he wanted hair, and so he's the one that really kind of started it. And Charles II, who was in exile because of the English Civil War, and Charles I being beheaded, and Oliver Cromwell taken over, when he came back to England, he brought it with him, and it became the fashion. The fashion. Most people, myself included, they either shaved their heads or they cut the hair very, very, very closely to wear wigs. Okay? Yes, sir.
How frequently did they hold the musters? Was it a monthly thing or kind of as the wind struck? Or I'm sure it differed from militia to militia.
Well, it was different from county to county, and most of the militias are county. There were some independent companies. Washington was a member of the Fairfax Independent Company, who were all horsemen. During the French and Indian War, it could be with the Indians being as prevalent as far as the frontier and attacking the frontier, could be once a week that they'd get together. Later on in the time period that I'm mostly covering here, I'd say it would probably be once a month, something like that. Yes, ma'am.
What's the silver?
This is a gorget, and if you see these out in the field, if you came up on this group of militia like you see in this picture, and one or more of the guys were wearing these gorgets, it would mean they were the officers. It's an emblem of rank. It's a leftover from medieval times when the armor would come up underneath of your throat. You see some paintings from the 17th century where they're wearing their armor, and this is just a holdover from that. It's more during this time period as a emblem of rank or being an officer. This one has the old seal of Virginia on it, which would have been appropriate for this time. Now in 1775, 76, the seal was changed to one that's, it's not like the seal on the flag today, which it just isn't. It's very similar to this one, but it was different. And this is a holdover from when the colony was British and not American. Yes, good, very well. Yes, 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 a good target. Yes. But also you got to remember that for the most part, you know, the lines that are forming in the militia is going to fight European army style, which is stand and fire at each other. You know, you'd have to have a pretty good eye, but it did happen where people picked people off of their horses, etc., because of either the uniform coat they were wearing or their gorget or whatever. While we're covering that, let me cover another emblem, badge emblem. Most, if not all of the officers during the militia times as well as the American Revolution carried this weapon, which is called a spontoon. And what it is it's just a badge. If you're in the back like this gentleman way back here and this lady, and you see this spontoon, you know that's where the officer, the guy that's probably in charge, that's where he's at. Now, that's not to mention that a lot of times with these, they didn't use them to keep the line straight or to keep people from running or whatever. But it's definitely a badge, just like the gorget is, of office of rank. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You may have mentioned this before. How long did a normal outfit like that last with just everyday wear?
My guess would be, not long, all things considered. probably a good wool broadcloth like this lasted. You can beat the crap out of it, and it lasts pretty good. Now, your linens, and you get a tear in it, and you make your repair and all of that. It's not going to be as forgiving, and that's why you see a lot of these pictures during their paintings during the war, during the Revolutionary War, with these guys that have a lot of patches on their clothing and all of that. So, any other on dress? Yes, ma'am.
What about laundry?
What's that?
I mean, I
That's a
read somewhere
Greek.
before where the people typically just have one or two outfits.
That's true. That's true, yeah.
And just
Yeah.
wash them, I guess.
Well, if there weren't, with the Army, there were camp followers and stuff. And ladies were paid, or women were paid to do laundry. And it was a wage for them, and it helped. If they were out in the field with their husband, it helped sustain the family. So you see that kind of stuff, and you see a lot of probably the local creek, and that's what it is. So now, one thing about laundry that I found told to me over the years, and I'm beginning where I'm starting to believe it. They say anybody that wore a lot of white shirts, lighter clothing and everything, were usually the richer folks because of the laundry, because of the cost of having it laundered more frequently. Now this shirt, dry clean on. This is a linen unbleached shirt, so it's never been bleached out, and that's what color it comes. And you see a lot of that as well. Whereas the white one I'm wearing is a bleached linen, and again, I think there's something to the laundry factor. Yes.
One of the big things I realized that they whitened the laundry, or the fabric itself is you would lay it out in fields and let it bleach with the sun.
Right.
And depending on the weather, that could take days, weeks, so
Yeah.
labor intensive.
Yeah.
Really cool.
All right, let's go on to the arms, just so I can get everything done before the bewitching hour, okay? The next thing I'd like to cover is firearms and hand arms. Now I've got two here. This is called the Queen Anne Gentleman's Pistol, and this is a unique character. They say, some people say that Blackbeard, the pirate, loved this weapon, and the reason he loved it because how you loaded it is you unscrewed the barrel, put the powder in, put the ball in, re-screwed it on, no ramrod like you see with the rest of these, and then you give it and then be ready to let her rip. But this is a gentleman's pistol, very typical of what an officer, or if you had one of these in your family, you'd carry it. It's a form of personal protection. This one is a leftover from the Scottish, the Highlanders of the French and Indian War, and this is a steel Scottish pistol. It's all steel, so the wear and tear on this is just phenomenally good. And it's a flintlock. It has its own rammer.
Sir, what's the caliber of each one?
The small one is, that's probably about 30, and this one is probably 50, thereabouts. There were a lot of different makers in Scotland that made these, and you see them from probably the 1720s, and they pretty much stopped working them at the turn of the 19th century. Next, some of you may heard me explain this one earlier. This is a Fowler, and this is the most universal gun carried during the Revolution and the French and Indian War. Would have been very popular gun with the militias. This one is a parts gun. In other words, it's been made up not from normal. There's a box of ramrod thimbles, this brass here, and there's a box full of locks, and there's a box full of side plates, and this gun is all put together from parts, okay? And it's, why? Because of necessity. You got to have the militia's got to be armed. The Army's got to be armed. So you do what you got to do. Fielding Lewis did a lot of parts guns down in Fredericksburg, Washington's brother-in-law.
So what does the term Fowler mean?
Fowler means it's another word for shotgun. And these, if you used bird shot in it, you could shoot birds. If you used a slug, you could shoot deer, bear, or whatever. It's very universal. And it's quickly loaded and fired, which is the main thing. Okay? Yes, they did for the most part. Yes. Unless there were not enough arms to equip them, and then they would get them at the public store in Williamsburg. Now this is not a parts gun. This is a second model Brown Bess. This was the standard weapon for the British Army towards the end of the French and Indian War, and it would have been the standard weapon or copies thereof for the United States Army or the militia. This one is dated 1762. It's a reproduction. But this is again, it's a Fowler. Although they're going to shoot a round ball 70 caliber, 75 caliber in this big, that thing comes flying at you, you better duck. But really, this is the backbone of probably the British Army and the American Army during the Revolution. Then last but not least, my personal favorite is the Virginia rifle. And this is rifled, so it shoots further, shoots longer, it's more accurate. The only problem is where a good soldier could fire either of those maybe 4 or 5 times a minute. This is like maybe two a minute, okay? Because you got to patch the ball. It's a process. Accuracy, tremendous. 400 yards, easily. At Saratoga, Timothy Murphy, a Dan Morgan's rifleman from Virginia, shot old Simon Fraser off his horse at about 400 or 500 yards, mortally wounded him. It's a killer. Yep. It does indeed. Yep. It's got rifling in the barrel. And this is, the barrel is real thick. It's a heavy gun. But it's, like I say, the accuracy, when Washington would place the army, he'd put riflemen at certain places and then his line troops at certain places because the firing ability of Fowlers and muskets is one thing and this is another. This is a copy of one that was made in Stanton, Virginia in the 1750s called the Faber rifle. But it's just sleek. The engraving, if you come up afterwards and see the carving in the engraving, it's a really, really typical example of a Virginia rifle from basically the 1750s to the 1780s. Yes, sir.
How common were rifles versus
Pretty common.
muskets?
Pretty common. Most everybody had Fowlers because the Fowler is a universal type weapon. Like I say, you could load it with birdshot and shoot, grouse or something like that. And then you could put a buck and ball and shoot at deer or bear or whatever. So overall, the Fowler would have been more preferred weapon. But, the rifle is, it's a reach out type, kill somebody type deal. Now I've got some edged weapons here. I'll show you this one first, the dagger. And these were around from medieval times, okay? And this is one of my personal favorites. It's buffalo horn, because you got to remember that the buffalo was in Virginia until 1790. The last one was killed down on the New River in 1790. So this is buffalo horn that's been spiraled, and the work is it's beautiful, And then it's a dagger blade, which the dagger, like I say, comes from medieval time. This is a copy of one that was used in the American Revolution. This next one is one of my personal favorites, and it's got a little bit of a story, so you're going to have to indulge me a little bit and say, what is that wacky looking thing? Okay? Well, this is a small sword that got snapped off. So it's only that long instead of that long. And this one in particular, I went to my mechanic of 40 years, and I'm in his shop, and I look and I see these parts, and there was this guard, and the blade, and the pommel were all laying there on a tool chest. So I cornered him and I said, what are you doing with that? And I knew what it was right away. I knew it was a small sword or the remnants of it. And so he says, well, my brother-in-law's house burnt down and that came out of the fire. So I said, what are you going to do with that? And so he says, nothing. Do you want it? And I said, yeah, I'd like to have it. He says, okay, you got to promise me something. If you have somebody put it all back together, you got to bring it in and show it the finished product to me, which I easily acquiesced to. And this one is, this is very common to see these short swords cut and made into weapons. You know, you could use this even for, you know, holding a stake over the fire. And these guys, common sense was a pretty serious issue with these guys. But it's very unique. It's probably from a Dutch sword, and it's got some silver wire engraving in it. At one time, it was a really, really nice sword. And so I sent it to a friend of mine that lives over in West by God and gave him my directions on it, and that's what I got back, which I was very pleased with. Here we have a typical sword of the time. This one happens to be a Dutch sword, and this is an original. And you can see the length of it compared to that one I just pulled out with its scabbard. Swords were, most of the officers wore swords, if not all of them. Very popular. This has an ivory grip. And like I say, I believe it's a Dutch sword. The one I'm wearing here is what is called a hunting sword, if I can get it out of here. There it is a hunting sword. And these were carried by anybody that went out, whether it was with a double-barreled shotgun or whatever. This was a dispatching weapon. Do you understand what I mean by that? In other words, if you killed a deer or you mortally wounded the deer and you wanted to put it out of its misery, this was the way to do it. The Germans made these, the French made these, everybody made these. These were a particular favorite with American officers during the Revolution because they were short, light, and still deadly. This one has an antler horn, and the shell grip is real common, very common. All right, last but not least, in the edged weapons, we have this little gem, and this happens to fit the Brown Bess. There were a lot of these weapons that went out in the field, and you couldn't put a bayonet on them. They just didn't fit. But this one fits that Brown Bess, and it's called a socket bayonet, and it's triangular in shape. And these were outlawed by the Geneva Convention back, I want to say about the time of World War I, because they do a triangular cut, and it's very hard to heal. And but like this pike or this pontoon, you add that onto a 6-foot weapon, and you got some protection, at least at a distance. Yes, sir.
What were most of the blades made of? Were they
Steel.
Steel?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to iron.
Yes. Yes. Questions on arms? Yes, John.
The going back to the guns, were there any other significant innovations in firearms during that time, other than the rifle?
There were a couple during the Revolution. You had the muzzle-loading Ferguson rifle, which had a screw type that opened and closed the chamber. You had, of course, there were shotguns, double-barreled flintlock shotguns, and some officers carried those. So yes, you know, here and there. Yes, sir.
Where did they get the parts for the rifles? Did a blacksmith make those or?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if you can imagine. Now, my best example is at Colonial Williamsburg. If you go to the gun shop, if they were still following the apprentice system down there, which they kind of do and kind of don't, you'd go in there as an apprentice, and probably the first thing you'd be doing is they'd hand you a lock that's been just forged, and you'd get the file out, and you'd file on that thing and get all the corners rounded and get it all pretty and everything, and then you do another one, and then you do another one, and then you do another one, and then, so after about 365 days, you were excellent at filing those locks. You see what I'm saying? So these guys, these shops, it was art, they were craftsmen. And the master, everything, his neck was on the line, his name was on the line, so, he wanted things his way. Anybody else? Okay. Now we'll get into the accouterments. Let's do pouches first. This is a really, really typical made-at-home, regular guy, regular farmer shot bag. And in here he'd keep his shot, he'd keep maybe some patches, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really typical one. You've probably seen more plain, simple ones like this, than any other kind.
And that would be gear?
Be for anything. Be anything. Be for anything.
It would be made out of.
Oh, this one here is a thin cow. You see them, I've seen them made out of pigskin. I've seen them made out of deer. I've seen them made out of cow. I've got one, I should have brought it, made out of a groundhog, which is my personal favorite, because I absolutely, from being on the farm and driving into their holes, I absolutely hate groundhogs. So you see them out of everything. This one here is a typical kind of issue box, and this one, very typical. This one's full of its proper rounds, and that's what it looked like. And you'd have this thing on your right side, and reach in here and pull one out and bite it off, bite the cartridge off, pour the powder, drop the ball, ram the paper down the muzzle, and when you got the command to fire, you fire. This one is, like I say, it's loaded.
And was there anything else to keep it dry? Just the top flap?
Just top flap. Yeah. Yeah, and for the most part, the way these are, they do a pretty good job. They do a pretty good job. Then this one, this is a battalion soldier's box, and this is a British one from the French and Indian War, and it's pretty much the same thing, only it's on a nicer scale and a more, I want to say, regimented, factory kind of built, although, small shop, so to built. Then over here you've got one of the favorite hand weapons, actually two of them, the tomahawk. And they, there was somebody I knew, now this is a great story, and being an ex-military myself, somebody, I think it was in Afghanistan, I believe it was either there or Iraq, some soldier over there, and I don't know what unit he was or anything, but he had a friend that I knew that this is what he wanted to carry as a side weapon over there. So he sent him a bunch of them, and it got so the whole unit wanted them to carry as a side weapon for their personal protection. And I just thought, you think about that and you go, well, we haven't progressed that far yet now, have we?
I actually knew a guy when I was working at Fort Bragg who was in one of the units who had a teammate that had like a Patriot level, like Mel Gibson tomahawk.
Yeah.
And got to use it.
Yeah.
Because both his firearms were taken from him.
Yeah.
Left, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just, war is war, Yeah, I suspect they were, but, I don't think I mean, I was a battery commander for artillery unit. If somebody showed up in my unit and had a bunch of these, I wouldn't take them away from them. You know, if that's what they thought they needed to protect themselves, I wouldn't. Non-reg, what's that, you know? Now this one's got kind of a neat handle, and this is an 18th century style. This is called the goose head or the duck head.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you see these type handles like that. This one is copied from a carpenter's box where all the handles and all the tools in that carpenter's box were that goose or duck head. And it's just one of those things where you go, it's cool, you know? Yeah. And if it ends up over in that man's, in his belt, I'm going to know he took it from me. If I'm the only one that's got a duck head, you know? Just kidding, of course. But yeah, this particular one was found in an Iroquois, the original was found in the Iroquois grave up in New York, this particular head. And this is a pole axe, so you could use, of course, the sharp end, and then you could use the flat end for as a hammer or something like that. Where this one is just a hand-forged small hawk. Next, we got our horns, and I've been really lucky. I've known some excellent horn makers over the year, and I was telling somebody earlier, this is called the Southern Banded Horn, and it was something that in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia, these banded horns for some reason were popular in the Mid-Atlantic, the lower Mid-Atlantic, of course. The man who made this one for me, how many of y'all have seen the movie The Alamo and Billy Bob Thornton as Davy? All right, he's carrying a Southern Banded that the same guy made that made this one for me. So, which is kind of neat. Now, these big militia horns like this one were really popular during the French and Indian War and into the Revolution. And the reason they call them a militia horn is because they're so big, and the amount of powder that could be carried in these was the only thing I've thought about this often, and I'll have you think about it, is if a bullet went through that thing when it's full of powder. It's going to get ugly like really fast, really fast. This one is in the Samuel Lounsbury style. There were two guys in New York and New England during the French and Indian War who carved multiple horns for multiple people, and most of them have their names on them. And a couple of guys have done the science on it so well that they can look at the lettering in the script and they can tell you which one of these two guys' horn it is, because the alphabet and everything they just have a certain style. And they made, I don't know, they're probably their horns one way or another in most of the museums in New York, including Fort Ticonderoga, in that whole area. This one I had a gentleman by the name of Lee Larkin, who is a phenomenal horner. He did this one per my instructions and made it for me, and it has my name and then Fauquier County with the date that the county was founded on it, 1759. But he made this for me, and he did a really nice job. This is another one made by the same guy, and this is just a really typical, plain militia horn. Very typical of the time. And then last but not least, this green one, which is iron oxide. I couldn't remember the guy's name, but he's an old horner. His name is Roland Cadle, and Roland made this horn years ago, and it's really translucent. You can see how much powder you have because he's scraped it so unbelievably thin that you can see through it. But these guys are the three of these guys that made these horns. They're some of the best contemporary guys out there. Last but not least, the canteen. Here's one, I don't know where that came from, the Liberty or skeleton bones. This is one I carried during the bicentennial. It's an oldie but goodie. It's called a kidney-shaped canteen. You can see the kidney shape. Okay. And it's been covered, when they're covered like this and you dip them in water, you'd get the cover wet, the water would stay cooler longer. And that's why they would cover them in wool. This is kind of a interesting guy, made out of leather. And then it's got beeswax pitch or beeswax that line the interior so that it's waterproof. And these were fairly common as well. And then last but not least, one of my personal off-the-farm favorites is the old gourd. And these actually, they work really well. This one I made. This one's been lined with brewer's pitch, and it works quite well. But these are the kind of things you would see out there. Oh. Not around here, but there was cork was being imported. Cork, yeah, it was out of the East Indies. And that about covers her. Oh, you couldn't go off to war without your blanket. So this one has been rigged on a tump line. And a tump line is something that the Indians, I'm not sure if they invented it, but they sure as heck used them. And the ropes on this are really long, as you can see. So it was good for tying up stuff to secure it. And this would keep the blanket over on your back and not in your way on the front of you. And it's made from hemp.
How would that be worn?
Oh, just over the,
One shoulder?
yeah, one shoulder or over the top or around the neck. Now, the Indians, sometimes when they'd carry loads, they'd use it on the forehead. So, all right. Any questions about any of that? Yes, sir.
Did they have knapsacks back then?
At the beginning of the war, you don't see very many at all. There's a patent called the Ural. It's UHL, David Ural. His is like, one thing I didn't cover is this bag. It looks very similar to this. This is a haversack. This one is made from hemp. And this is where you carried all your personal goods, your victuals, all of that in this bag. It's kind of universal for that. And the same thing, the other one on that one's pretty much the same thing. They run all different sizes. Mainly, this is copied from a New York one. So, okay, now I got it covered. Questions?
The canteen that you had, are there any other examples of them, of soldiers personalizing their canteens like people in Vietnam used to do with their helmets?
There's some painted ones that I've seen that might have like US on them or something like that. You see more of the painted ones later on during the War of 1812 and that time. Sometimes you see a compass rose on them and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, not pre-Revolutionary War, Revolutionary War, for the most part. And I never say never, because just when you say that, something pops up and you go, oh boy, I shouldn't have said that, you know? So, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Did the word tomahawk was that the Indian word, or where do
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. You know, yeah, axe is probably the old, the Vikings carried ones other than like this one, but bigger. You know, it's an old weapon, domestic as well as wartime. So I don't know. I think it's just like everything else. There's, pseudonyms? There's a lot of...
Yeah. I was just wondering, because it almost looks like a hawk-shaped V.
Yeah. Well, some of them, the broad axes of that time, they look medieval. The felling axes where they do trees and stuff. They look really medieval. Anybody else? That's it? Buttons? Buttons. No, these are bone. I'm sorry. They're horn. They're horn. You see horn, pewter, You see some of these paste stone ones like this. Most everything's either pewter or brass or copper or horn. And horn is, if you haven't guessed by the few things that I have, horn is kind of the plastic of the 18th century. They made everything out of horn. Cups, powder horns, buttons, everything, just everything. It was like 18th century plastic.
How do powder horns work? Do they have like little lids, the caps on the top? Is that the way they twist all of that? Oh, so it's just like.
And you'd have to use a funnel when you filled it. I've got a little brass funnel that I use on them because that brass doesn't spark and make April Fool's a bad day. Any other questions?
Socks would have been hand-knitted or not?
There were some machines around, but for the most part, when people left Culpeper here or Fauquier, they probably had hand-knitted socks on. And there's a certain pattern that they used that, you can buy new ones made in that pattern even today. Anybody else? You're spellbound? I must have covered the subject matter well. Yes, ma'am.
Well, your coat's red.
Well, there's no significance to that because your most famous colors or most widely used colors of broadcloth were brown, green, blue, like a royal blue, navy blue, and red. So at the beginning of the war, would I maybe been taking chances if I was out somewhere in the field wearing this red coat? Quite possibly. But it's at this stage of the war, I wouldn't be the only one, let's put it that way. Yes?
Briefly covers the Culpeper Militia, when they marched from here in March of '75 to Williamsburg. How long were they there and what happened to them after that? Were they much into the Virginia line or
I know they went to the public store there. I don't know, there's a lot of people walking around the streets of Culpeper and et cetera that know this stuff. I think from there, after they went to the public store and they were armed and everything, I think they went down to Great Bridge. Yeah. 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 I think they went to Great Bridge with I think the 2nd Virginia was with them down there. Yes, sir.
I know it seems pretty self-explanatory, but the public store, can you elaborate a little bit more?
The public store, that's a good question. The public store was a place where it's like you see the magazine and you see, if you've seen any interior pictures, you see all these muskets lined up in there. It's the public store. In other words, those weapons, they belong to the colony. And that's why the Virginians got so mad when Lord Dunmore took all the powder out of the magazine down there because it was theirs. It wasn't his to take. He thought it was, but it wasn't. Well, the public stores was the same kind of a place, only it was for kind of like everything else but the weapons. Cloth, you name it. You name it. Where the public store was in Williamsburg is now, there's like a 1803 brick building, 2-story building. It's right off of the green, but that's where the public store building was in Colonial Williamsburg, was there. But it's, like I say, it was the equipage place. They would have probably bayonets, canteens, probably not bayonets, probably they'd be in the magazine, but canteens, pouches, barrels of whatever, yeah.
How many in the area of Virginia were there?
Public stores?
Yeah.
I think it was the only one. I may be wrong. I don't think there were any others at that time. Because nobody was, while there was a lot of rhetoric and there was a lot going on, I don't think anybody really expected, to this thing go off the deep end like it did, And so it wasn't like Virginia was really ready. The best, let me finish by telling this story because this is one of the best militia stories there is. All right, you got the whole war going on. Militias are cycling in, cycling out with the regular Continental line, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they bottle Cornwallis up at Yorktown. So what do you think happened with all the militias in just about the whole state of Virginia? They wanted to be in on the butt kicking, so they all went to Yorktown. They had so many people down there, they couldn't feed them all, but they wanted to be there for the end because they knew that once they found out in the obscure places like here, they knew it was over. Everybody knew it was over, and they all, as they would say, beat feet down there to probably say on their dying bed that I was there. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to you guys again for coming out tonight. Like I said, this is a monthly series. Then in June, our very own executive director, John Christensen, is going to talk about the Culpeper Minutemen in history and memory. So sort of basically that exhibit case that's over there. July, I'm hoping to have one of the Sons of the American Revolution who's in the Minutemen chapter talk about who the Culpeper Minutemen actually were, the actual people there. And then in August, because it's the 200th anniversary of Lafayette's grand visit, we're gonna have a lecture about who Lafayette was and why we cared that he was here 200 years ago. So those are some of the upcoming events. If you're not a member, which I think most of you are, consider becoming a member. You get into these events for free. And again, thank you all for coming out, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Bye.